welcome to another BetaKit Live. I am Douglas Soltys, editor-in-chief of BetaKit, and we stand on the precipice of a bunch of new tech that promises to radically alter a variety of industries. And if businesses want to keep up with how things are changing, they're going to need to pay attention to this tech. Now, interestingly enough, a lot of this seems to be intersecting in the world of commerce, impacting how payments, banking, financial services are managed, delivered, and safeguarded. I can't think of a better company to talk to about this stuff than MasterCard, which is why I'm very happy to have Darrell MacMullin to talk about emerging tech's impact on financial services. Darrell, thank you so much for doing this, man.
Great to be here.
Yeah. Okay. We've got so much to talk about.
Let's do it.
And I think we can go real long on this, but I want to keep it tight and engaging for the people watching this. And I think maybe the best place to start is with MasterCard because I don't know if you want to describe, you wear a lot of hats. There's a lot of consumer back-end infrastructure touch points.
Yeah.
So could you talk to me how you feel MasterCard finds itself in like the broader set of financial services?
Yeah, it's a great way to start. MasterCard's been a brand around a long time. People know and think of it, as a traditional credit card, if you will. MasterCard turned 50. It's a 50-year-old tech company is like ancient. Right?
Yes.
I'm 50, so I feel ancient some days too. But when I think of where you are in your life at 50, you're kind of that sandwich generation where hopefully, if you're lucky, you still have your parents around. You may have some kids. It's kind of like the way MasterCard is. If I think of like the parents, it's like the traditional card networks, the credit network, the debit network, prepaid cards have been around for a long time.
The eldest child.
The eldest child, if you will. Yeah, I think of them almost as the parents. They're still alive and kicking and doing really well. You can tons of business cases. Arguably one of the world's greatest moats around things like that from a technology perspective. But that's kind of like where our roots were. Over the last 10 to 20 years, it's been about the electronification of payments, digitization of payments, tokenization, e-commerce, cross-border payments, all of that, the just traditional money movement and the role that plays overall. And then other days I feel like I have this like classroom of kids of new capabilities, and whether that be crypto, whether that be open banking, whether that be installments, buy now, pay later. I can go down the list of probably 25 other different things. I think in total our product portfolio is something like 687 products. You can imagine there's this whole spectrum of type of capabilities you have. And when you have kids, you have hopes and dreams and you think you know what they're going to be like, but you don't know yet. And
they all want to be firefighters right now.
Totally. And that's kind of how I feel about those technologies too, right? So, and we can talk about that, whether it be AI, whether that be open banking. We have hopes and dreams and we have some ideas and where they can go. But it's early days in some of that as well. But I think we can learn from the lessons that we've had on the last 20 years on the electronification of payments. And then, of course, just more broadly, what it means to be a network and the role of a network in any ecosystem. You play this kind of level playing field, whether it's a small business or a large corporate or a government or a financial institution or a fintech startup. We intersect with all of them and we try and enable value for all of them and protect everyone as part of those transactions.
Okay.
So I don't know if that helps kind of like sum
helpful.
up an average week.
And then would it be fair to say, like within your role specifically at MasterCard, it's like your job to keep track of the family? Like grandpa down to the new toddler, like how everybody's doing,
that, right? Yeah, I mean, everyone has a roadmap, right?
Okay.
Everything is, whether you're generating revenue, whether you're making sure you're delivering the right value. I think probably if you were to bucket, what are the three primary things that MasterCard does? Because all that stuff I talked about were products. If I kind of leveled up, there's probably like three waves. One is data analytics. One is cybersecurity. And one is around real-time connectivity and authentication. Those are a bit buzzwords, but I could probably put all of those things into those three buckets as to what's the role that MasterCard plays. to have all this new technology actually work for people.
Yeah. Okay. So this is where we shift from like the consumer facing engagement side that everyday people are familiar
Sure.
with, and you're working with technology and data partners and whoever, and doing your own work
Yep.
to actually provide, to make the platform a platform, or to connect the things that then become a platform.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you were to tell the average consumer, yeah, you should be part of the token authentication framework, they'll be like, huh, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
But they love the idea of being
I
able
love
to,
that band.
yeah. But they love the idea of being able to just tap their phone
Yes.
to be able to pay for things.
Okay.
That's what they care about.
Yeah.
And how does that make their life simpler in some ways?
So keeping this in mind, then, I think if we're going to have a conversation about anything emerging tech, we should probably talk about the technology that is being hyped right now to change all of society and every industry included within that. But I want to keep this narrow beam focused within a commerce framework. So when we're talking about AI, how do you think it's going to impact? Let's start customer experience, but then also underlying infrastructure that feeds that platform, that iceberg we were talking about before.
Yeah.
But let's start with the customer experience of AI.
Sure. I think even before we go into that, let's actually just talk about kind of technology waves a little bit, right? Because I already exposed my age, so it's obviously not my first rodeo in terms of these things. And it's kind of funny how the cycle goes, where the similar language around when something new and big comes along and how it's going to change everyone's lives. That was the information superhighway, which was the internet, and then it was mobile and all those changes that mobile will have to people's lives. And then it was cloud and all the changes that the cloud would have. And now it's AI. The funny thing is that there's almost kind of like stages or degrees of acceptance with any of these new technologies. I find it kind of interesting that initially they all think of these technologies as products, and they're not actually products, right? They're actually their capabilities or their infrastructure, which may become critical infrastructure in some ways. But it wasn't like, let's use example of all of those, right? The internet, it wasn't the internet itself that was the interesting product. It was the applications on top, the Googles, the e-commerce in general, right?
My GeoCities page.
Yeah, exactly.
I was waiting for you to say it, but I'll bring it up right now.
And mobile, it was, applications like GPS, which led to Uber, which and things like social media. And it wasn't until like third or fourth generation, the iPhone, that you had the ability to do a selfie and all that sort of stuff that came around. Cloud, everyone talked about for a while, but it wasn't until you saw things like Netflix and Spotify and how they transformed industries and how you interact and intersect in your daily lives. AI is kind of going to be the same way, right? AI is not a product. People early days, they're thinking of it that way. And the initial, tire kicking are building some end user interfaces like a chat GPT for people to start, getting familiar and comfortable with it in any way. I think of AI more as like electricity, right? If you actually, what are we, 2024? If you think 100 years ago, 1924, electricity was like the AI,
hot new thing,
right? And it was the same thing. It was like Wild West. People were probably getting electrocuted. There's probably a lot of house fires. There were a lot of things, a lot of experimentation going on. A lot of standards had to come out. Any new technologies, there's the good side and the bad side.
Like you literally standardizing like how electricity happens, right? Like we shouldn't walk past that idea of not just like forget like UK versus North American outlets. Right. It's like what voltage are we setting this stuff at?
Yeah, like your fuse box in your house and all that sort of. There's standards, there's governance. And why those stages are needed, obviously, is to build wide-scale trust. The reality is trust doesn't move at the same pace as technology, right? Every week there's a hot new thing on technology, but do people trust it at the same pace? No, it takes time. It takes time. And then all those elements of governance and security and compliance play root. And I bring that up because I do feel like that actually is core to MasterCard's DNA. Right? It's not about what new technologies MasterCard's bringing to the table. It's how do we make these technologies usable enough at a wide scale that people can trust them.
Okay.
So you can go anywhere in the world and know when you see the kind of MasterCard brand behind something, you have a different level of trust and security that I can interact with that merchant or I can do that transaction.
I get that. So if I were to carry that forward, it's like if for MasterCard or for you to deem a technology worthy of the product level to introduce,
Mm-hmm.
I guess at either side on the back end or the consumer divide, it's got to pass some sort of like trust filter. And I'm assuming that's like capability, standardization, all of the actual like heavily regulated financial services stuff that we could talk about like by country that we'll just put off for another conversation. But is this a very historically grounded way of you saying, I have no idea what these products are going to be yet because we're still evaluating the technology as they become products?
No, I think actually I'll take it a step inward a little bit, where any new technology that comes to the market, we never bring it to market first.
Mm.
We actually figure out, because you shouldn't assume that you as any organization, actually, it's not part of your DNA yet. You weren't born on this new capability.
Yeah.
We've been doing AI for like a decade, and early stages of, diagnostic and predictive capabilities. So if you could say of the millions of AI companies that are out there today, what's the one common denominator they all have in their level of quality or capability is the quality or capability of the data they have access to.
Okay.
Right.
And this is AI is data electricity kind of thing?
A little bit, right? And so if there's one thing that MasterCard is not shy of is data, right? If, when you have, just on the card network side, you probably have 3 billion cards in the market doing 15 billion transactions today, which generate probably 1 trillion data points daily. Whether that be geolocation, relationship between a merchant and consumer, the type of items you're buying, is that your device where, there's a zillion different points of data. We figure out how to apply AI to our own systems internally because every company is inefficient at some level or another, right? I touched on earlier, we've got, 600 plus products.
Mm-hmm.
Each one of them has multiple versions that people are using. Each one has multiple implementation guides, multiple user guides, multiple technical support guides. So think of the thousands and thousands of pages of documentation that MasterCard has. What does an AI agent help do to go from reams of content to an agent that can help you understand how to use a product?
What do I do with my points?
Right?
Right?
No, exactly.
Yeah.
Check out this code. It could be everything from QA to finding the right thing. And that's really a really low level example, but actually probably a critical one. If you're a bank, right? Or if you're a tech company or you have any sort of a large user base, before you go and try and put something in front of a consumer to figure out and understand, put something within your own company, within your own processes to figure out how you can make things more efficient between your customer support teams and your product teams or your delivery teams and the like. Yeah. So there's lots of efficiency that AI can use internally within companies. And that goes back to the point of, if it's like electricity, it should be powering everything in your company.
How you feel the adoption curve is going to look like for business and consumers, and we can talk about like speculation on other feature sets you're looking at. But I kind of feel like you're answering a little bit in terms of MasterCard's process to evaluate, to build, and to learn. But let's go back to the electricity thing. If for the average person to come in contact with the internal combustion engine or electric lights, they're probably going first to the World's Fair. Yeah. Or they're reading about it. Yeah. It's either being over a long period in a very context heavy way presented to them, and then it gets disseminated across society. You and I were talking right before this about prominent tech people sharing deep fakes of them right now. Yeah. We're just on a level of like distribution of new exciting things that's like far beyond any other time. So maybe I want to ask you first how you navigate the adoption curve you're talking about.
What's that expression? People overestimate the change they can make in the short term and underestimate the change they can make in the long term. It's kind of, that's the kind of rule 101 with technology in a lot of ways too, right? And maybe it goes back to, there is, the internal geek in all of us that love the new shiny ball and the new technology. And some are early adopters more than others, but we all have a little bit of that kind of intellectual curiosity.
You either want to plug it in or take it apart.
Yeah. But would you rely on it? Would it to run your business or run your life or take over certain components of your
personal finances, business finances?
Yeah, exactly. So, and it's you can have a ton of different examples on that, whether that be crypto or whether that be anything else. If I think of the role that we play in providing critical infrastructure for economies to run, that's where we are. It's one thing building technology, it's another to scale it. They're two completely different things. And they're often two different parties.
Yes.
Right. So we're not necessarily the company that creates a lot of the technology, but we figure out how to scale it and how to create those standards that people can rely on. When it comes to things like deep fakes, of course, AI, as any new technology, there's a good side and a dark side. I thought it was very clever of my cybersecurity and fraud team in one of our quarterly business reviews last year, decided to do a deep fake of me and have me present how great they were.
We're along the path of where I wanted to get to here. And, I wanted to even just tackle AI as its impact on cybersecurity, because it's a huge component of what you guys do in terms of, again, you are helping it enable these channels of commerce, but then you also have to enforce those standards, protect them against all the people that would see opportunity in getting access to the data, the rails, the actual transactable component of this. Does MasterCard have a thesis on, at the consumer level, where some of these tools might be enabled? Like, you're testing internally. And like, I want to hear from you where you are seeing tangible gains towards building like trusted and interesting products.
Okay. Yeah. Right. We love our loyalty programs, but if I think of the last
down to my barber,
right? Yeah. Last 10 to 15 years.
Shout out to my barber. Thanks for the haircut. Appreciate that.
It was predicated predominantly on some sort of point scheme, a little bit of a gamification, and a collection of points, whether it's tied to a card or tied to a merchant or whatever the case is. But what does the role of AI play on being able to provide real-time enriched experiences? Because again, I actually don't think loyalty is a product. I think loyalty is an outcome.
Of a continued relationship of value back and forth, right?
So if I can change the relationship and experience with real-time conversations, real-time engagement, real-time offers that are tailored and targeted to me, it drives me nuts. If we're going back to the financial, you're talking about financial impact. If you think about it conceptually, a good part of your life is responsible with your financial institution, right? You have your mortgage, your banks, and all that, or your cash and all that stuff, and your investments and your retirement, all in a bank. And you'll walk into a branch and nobody knows you.
Yes. You have to advocate.
It's startling. Like, think about that for a second.
Well, when we talk about it at the chatbot level, right? You never want to be on the end point of a conversation with a major business trying to advocate on behalf of yourself for either your loyalty or an imminent change in loyalty because of some sort of experience, because you feel anonymous to them.
I think if I bucket the modernization of loyalty, I think goes from just transactional to relationship. So, it's same going, and say if you're at that institution forever and you sign up for a new product, you're treated like a day one customer today.
Yes.
It's mind boggling. You even have to fill out an application.
Yes.
For a new product.
And then we're not throwing shade in any specific industry where you go to your doctor's office or whatever. Everyone's treated.
I'm just
it's all intake, right?
I'm just exposing what the opportunity is on the modernization of loyalty and the impact something like AI can have in the relationship between any merchant and its customers.
Okay. What is required? Well, I'll take a step back to get data on the cloud required us from going to actual racks of storage space to a virtualization process that, like, once it's there, it's like, oh, it's the same thing. It's just in the cloud. It's just up there. It's great. You can pull it down anytime. For me, got internet connection?
Different
awesome.
folder on my computer.
Yes. What you are talking about is all of that data being in relation to each other, some sort of thing parsing it, connecting it to human decision makers to, like, say, you know, how do we want to keep and maintain that loyalty, and then a consumer touch point. So in your, like, product and platforms responsibility, take us behind the curtain, and, like, this isn't as simple as, like, oh, we're digitizing this thing or we're putting it on the cloud. What's the work going on right now? Is it even just, like, knowing where all the data is to connect it and feed it and train it, or what is that like? And I know, like, we could go, I'm willing to go as nerdy as you want to go, but what I'd prefer is if we stay someplace that's tangible for people to understand, like, the effort required to take tech to product.
Well, I think that goes back to what I get excited at MasterCard and its role as a network can do, not only for that bank, but for that small business on the corner who doesn't have a loyalty program. And how can he actually have a better loyalty or relationship experience and not having to have a big tech lift in many ways. There's roles that networks can play that actually provide that for any merchant. So I think we're very, very cognizant of how do you make sure whatever technology is coming to market, that you're providing a level of safety and security and soundness that people can trust and build trust with over time. And then the second layer to that is inclusivity. How are you making sure that you are, as often as possible, leveling the playing field for whether it's a small fintech or whether it's a just a Canadian company trying to do business internationally, or a small business? How can they take advantage of that technology just as equally as a larger company can?
Because if you were building it for just one of those cohorts, you'd be replicating the old style of, well, we either need a rewards program for everybody, or we only offer it to the people that, so you've got to be building versatility in from the beginning. And then the network side, are you basically, like, this is where you're saying without saying it because you're very confident in it, we know every data touch point that would be required for this because we watch that process happen every day, basically.
And on the dark side of that fence, because you touched that, you looked over it a little bit earlier, same thing applies, right? So it is a continual arms race, right? If there's anyone that adapts technology faster than anyone else, it's people that can take advantage to do some sort of
it's weirdos on the internet. It's bad actors.
And the cost of scaling is actually a lot less. So there is a lot of things that we do from a protection standpoint. If you think of account takeovers, Canadians are actually, I saw this the other day, we are the most targeted population on the planet for SMS scams. Right?
Because we're so trusting.
So, and that's for everything from, I won't say some large delivery company that says you have a package waiting for you, to someone else who's lonely and just wants to text you, and it's all of a sudden it's a romance of some sort. Romance scams are really, really big. So big, there was actually a financial institution in the UK that have actually, on their customer support team, hired psychologists.
Oh, wow.
Because we're working with that financial institution to identify romance scams. You think you've fallen in love with someone and you're going to send them money to have a flight to come and see you.
Meanwhile, you failed a Turing test and
So rather than have a customer support person call them and say, we blocked your transaction because we think it's fraudulent. And that customer saying, what are you talking about? You don't know who I am. You don't know what I'm talking about. Screw you. Where's my money? The bank is genuinely trying to protect the customer in that regard. Do they always get it right 100%? No, nothing's up. But they're going to err. Are they the 90th percentile? Are they on the right side of the fence? So I thought it was incredibly impressive, actually, of that institution to have psychologists to be able to talk to their customer about the situation they've gotten themselves into, which is, it's not about the transaction and we're protecting, fraud. It's about kind of, again, going back to the relationship there. So it, the role that we play there, obviously, things like credit card fraud, we've, done a great job with over the lifespan of our history, but that's expanded much more into more broadly account opening, account takeovers, loyalty fraud. There's a lot of other different categories. I touched on romance scams and things like that as well. And there are a lot of data points and touch points that we are identifying not to track. We have zero interest in tracking people. We're not a media company. We're not trying to monetize anyone in that regard. But we do want to make sure that if you've suddenly logged into an account and you've changed the email address and you've accessed it from a device that's never been accessed before, we even know that if you're accessing from your mobile phone, you hold it in your left hand at 35 degrees on average, and your typing speed's 35 words a minute. And these are your typical common language. Like, there's a lot of things that...
Yes, if the information was implemented instantaneously, almost as if through an API, maybe it's probably not the actual customer. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I got some data here. So this is from the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center, noting that Canadians lost 554 million Canadian due to fraud in 2023 alone, which is up from 531 million in 2022. So this is like a thing. Yep. And I would say this is before, although anyone paying attention has seen the number of enterprise level and even like municipal level, like cities are getting hacked and are in a ransomware state. I still don't think we've seen the real product explosion of deepfakes and stuff like this. Are you telling me that the real, beyond the tech, the real threat vector is new capacity for cheap deployable tools to attack cuddly Canadians who don't think that anyone's wishing to do them harm? Like, is it the human element that's the easiest vector?
Well, hindsight always gives you kind of an interesting or different perspective than when you were going through something, right? If you were to rebuild the internet from scratch, knowing what we know now and knowing how it's being used and the type of applications it's used for compared to early days, you look at the initial white papers of the internet, it was about the disintermediation of information. The problem, though, was our identity became content. Right? Like, I'm willing to bet the average Canadian has between 120 and 150 accounts online, whether that be with retailers, banks, social networks, places that you've done business, cities, federal taxes, whatever the case is. It's roughly around there, 120, 150. Of all of those accounts, you've probably used 2 to 3 email addresses, 3 to 5 passwords.
Ooh, 3 to 5?
We make it really, really easy.
That's bad
for the hackers.
That actually made my spine tingle a little bit. That's that number isn't high enough.
And so when you then think of, you talked about kind of the incremental or the acceleration of hacks and access to data and information, whether it's a large global hotel chain or whether it's a platform or a local city, I hate to tell you this, but your basic identity, your first name, last name, address, date of birth, it's pretty much public domain at this point. Yeah. Right. And it actively can be monetized, which is why we're going to do a viral social media dance right now. Right.
That's what we had practiced beforehand. Right. Like identity, it's not just available and accessible. It's being commoditized and is part of the commerce of the internet now.
Identity to me is like money. Right. It actually should be treated like money or a financial instrument. And so if there was a layer that was missing on the internet, it was about, you can call it authentication or identification.
Something other than IP addresses?
Yeah, exactly. Because even that is, pretty random these days. But, where do I see that having a much bigger impact over the next little while? It's probably the tokenization of identity, right? If you think of, well, let's just say I don't know if your audience knows what tokenization is. You have a credential, it is encrypted and tethered to either a merchant, a device of some form to securely protect that credential from being replicated. Works well for credit cards, right? And so that's why you can store a version of your card on your phone and in your web wallet of some sort, whatever your preference is, or store it on different places, and it works, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you need to have some sort of authentication with it. Identity should have been treated the same way, right? And the notion that we still use plastic cards to verify ourselves
with the super secret CVC on the back, right? Because that's
well, yeah, but you're talking about credit cards. Let's just even use something like provincial health cards.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Right? That you show up at a walk-in clinic or your doctor's office, you're not even authenticated.
Yes.
They're taking that number for billing purposes. So they know who to bill bill it against. But they don't actually know if it's you. They didn't know that you can actually buy that template online and Photoshop version for $20 or something like that.
And generative AI, why not just be throwing them out like candy, right? It simplify. Okay. So is this where we get to biometrics as a tie-in, right? So if you're going to have this kind of like token of self, matching and verifying that needs a similar level of like, you can't be standing beside your digital ID all the time being like, obviously it's me.
Yeah.
So how is this being implemented and impacted? And I know like you guys launched your own biometric authentication service through FIDO, which is the fast identity online. Basically, again, back to standards, right?
Standards, exactly. Right. So make sure they have something that's interoperable.
And like Google, Apple, 1Password, this is the place where they decide how ID is being figured out, right?
Exactly. And so we're democratizing things like biometric services. So whether you're a small business, you shouldn't have to figure out how to build out a whole tech stack in order to accept biometric service capabilities. It should be a very light lift. Now, changing habits and behaviors, obviously, at any company, there's a process change. But we're trying to make that lift significantly light for anyone to be able to adopt.
Yeah. And I would say most people probably, with a phone from like the last 3 to 4 years, is probably a little bit more comfortable with biometrics than they would be. And even Touch ID. Touch ID was the big one, I think, for people because they're like, there's to your generations. There's a generation like nobody's putting my fingerprint on anything and sending it anywhere. And then it becomes the ultimate convenience. And then from the facial component, I had a real strong reaction to that just because I didn't want to be cognizant of how I like looked or what I was projecting to the world every day. Yeah. But I also know it's been like it's incredibly smooth and convenient. Have you seen do people that like MasterCard engages with understand that that's biometrics, or do they like, oh, it's the new whatever feature, and I do the face swipe or the tappy tap, and then I don't have to think about it.
Yeah. So it's funny you said tappy tap because that's exactly what my mother said. Because it was a perfect example when we talk about inclusivity.
I'm deep in my research now.
Right? Is my parents are at that age where they're starting to get a little forgetful. They're seeing all of the processes around them migrate to online. Yeah. They're getting overwhelmed with password resets, two-factor authentications. Like they were like printing off their bills and going into the bank. And
was this 32-bit or 64-bit encryption?
All that sort of stuff. And so it actually got to the point it was like super overwhelming for them. Now they have a keyboard where they just press. It's brought them closer to doing more things online.
So the pendulum has swung backwards, where the level of complexity has now made people more comfortable with. Okay, this is great because I wanted to talk about this a little bit because you were conveying some really cool James Bondy style how to catch bad actors type stuff, right?
Can't
because
tell you everything.
You'd have to kill the stream. But in many other contexts, either historically or depending on who you're asking, some of what you're describing and the knowledge that you have access to make sure the right person is engaging with it is also horrifying if that information is malappropriated. So how do you, like, we've been talking a lot about trust more in enablement of like good experiences, but you're also using information to combat bad actors, and there's got to be a trust component in terms of misusing that. So like, where does privacy play into this?
Yeah, huge. Let's talk about an experience probably everyone in your audience has done.
Okay.
And they probably never realized all the complexity that happens around it, right? Back in the day, you used to hail a cab.
Yes.
And you get in that cab. Maybe they accepted credit cards. Maybe they didn't. Maybe you just paid cash. You didn't know where that.
Maybe the meter wasn't working.
Who knows? Yeah. There was a whole bunch of stuff. And the cab driver didn't know who was getting in the back of his car. They were worried. Are they going to get robbed? They may have a whole bunch of cash on them. So there was a significant lack of trust on both the driver and the passenger. If you think of when you order an Uber or Lyft or any other sort of car ride service that's out there, the amount of complexity that's happening when you do that, you're authenticating the user, you're making sure it's their device, you're authenticating their financial instrument, making sure that they can actually pay for any sort of ride.
Yep.
You're authenticating the driver. The driver may actually have to take a selfie before he picks up that ride.
Yep.
So there is a significant level of authentication that's happened before you even get into that vehicle.
Oh, and then when you're in, even to the level, sometimes I'll receive a message if we're stuck in just horrible Toronto traffic, being like, hey, just checking in. Are you okay? We've noticed that you have stopped moving and you're not at your destination yet, which I think, as two white guys, we can note here is probably incredibly comforting to certain demographics of people that might feel very, very unsafe.
Teenage
being
daughters.
Yes.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. There's a whole bunch of, safety. So there's making sure there's not bad actors. How do you enrich the safety experience from a user experience standpoint? And then from a checkout experience, it goes away. There is no payment, or there is a payment, but the payment experience isn't like this extra thing at the end of a ride and I'm trying to get out. And that's where actually biometric I think we'll start seeing more and more in relation to commerce in general. You're starting to see it already. I've been talking about this for the years. The next thing to be disrupted is the checkout. But you're starting to see even vendors at certain airports. I know at the sports arena here, instead of having to stand and wait in a line to pay for stuff, you can just walk up. There's cameras that are biometrically authenticating you. And if you've agreed to be able to sign up for that service and pay for it, walk in, walk out. You've gotten rid of the checkout.
That type of data is never really shared. It's more accessed, and then access is turned off, right?
Yep.
Like there's a secure element on Name My Electronics device that allows it to know that I am me, my thumbprint is me, whatever, but that's never conveyed, which is going back to the cloud example, very, very different. Is that the fire break between enabling all of these benefits to having that and not being like, oh my God, I just put like my digital thumbprint on the internet?
Yeah. The last thing you want to do is create a honeypot of biometric data.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. But you are touching on an important point that every company that you interact or intersect with is collecting more and more data, right? And so whether you like it or not, whether because you signed up for their loyalty program or is because you bought something online with them so they know your home address and all that sort of stuff that are stored in a profile, your information is stored in more and more places. So when it comes to cybersecurity, a lot of small businesses think, well, it's not on me. I've signed up and I use this software platform. I use this cloud service and it's on them to figure that out. There actually is a pretty significant layer of responsibility that everyone should have. It's not that they should have an expensive burden on, but there should be a level of awareness and consideration. You could be an accountant. You can be a lawyer with an entire rack of divorce files.
Yes. Name the data set. There's a level of,
There's massive amounts of considerations there. So there's a lot of capabilities that MasterCard has there. Things like Risk Recon and My Cyber Risk. That is a very, 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 very light and easy way for any company to understand what their cybersecurity risk is. Is my network secure? Is my supply chain that I interact with digitally, is there vulnerabilities there, right? And they shouldn't have to figure that from a tech, but these tools and capabilities MasterCard provides to many small businesses and platforms. And you get just basically like a scorecard. You're like, your supply chain, A+, you're good. Or C, you've got some parties who have either been in vulnerability threats or they've been hacked, or if you're sending data to them, there's a variety of different ways that there is a level of awareness and consideration people need to have, but we need to make sure that they have the right tools, that it's not super disruptive for their business.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And again, we're talking about like the power of these networks as new tech emerges and gets productized. I would be super remiss if I didn't have someone from MasterCard here and we didn't talk a little bit about open banking and payments modernization, because we're like, what if your mom uses her phone to take an Uber or a Lyft, and this infrastructure doesn't exist in a vacuum? It's definitely an intersection of public and private sector.
Yeah.
But also I know that everything that we've tried to talk about so far today is contextualize it for like the average person's experience and then showing the iceberg of how that exists. I know for a fact that open banking and payments modernization means absolutely nothing to the average Canadian, particularly since they haven't had it. So how would you contextualize what these new pipes, this new tech will enable for the people listening to this who have followed along up until this point?
Sure.
Because we got through biometrics, we can get through open banking.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, for sure. So it's another great bucket or example of, again, I don't think open banking is a product. I think it's infrastructure and it's about the applications you build on top of it. Some of those may be almost invisible or feel invisible to someone, but it just provides a level of value and convenience. So MasterCard is heavily involved around the world around open banking standards. Some of the standards that are out there, some of the founders of those standards actually work at MasterCard. So we work very closely on that. If I go back to kind of what I talked about earlier on the kind of where I see the three pillars of all of our capabilities: data analytics, cybersecurity, and real-time authentication. That's open banking.
Yeah, that's the whole
three of those.
thing.
That's the end-to-end really of what open banking is in some ways. But
so wait, have we just been having a conversation about open banking the whole time? Because that would be the level of BetaKit turducken.
That's a matrix.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Because you because the process through which that data would be shared, secured, like we're talking, even the examples we were talking about before of certain financial institutions being able to offer you, like actually have different offers based upon your loyalty, your history. Traditionally, that would have to come through one specific financial institution because, up until that point, your data is Fort Knox, right? Like they keep it in the vault, literally. What we're now is describing a circumstance where that information can be connected, passed along, utilized in way for net new services that could be coming from
the same company.
Well, yes, the same company, but
you
also
can be a company that offers insurance, brokerages, banking, and the banking part has no idea they have an insurance relationship with you or a brokerage relationship.
I'm still thinking about that small business who might be working on something really, really cool that I would love to sign up for if I don't have to fill out 30 pages of my personal history to validate the risk profile of something like that, right? So you see open banking as the mechanism for a lot of these products. Where does the we talk about payments modernization. It's really just like real-time rails. Where is that again just another like, what if we could do all the things that we do now but faster? Like how does that pay off for the businesses and consumers that are using it? What does that next level enable?
So, great question. I would say the first problem open banking has is the name open banking. It actually it needs a rebranding of sorts, because that in itself terrifies people. It terrifies banks and it terrifies consumers. What do you mean? My banking information is supposed to be secure and locked down. It's the reason why I have a relationship with the bank.
Yes.
Open
it's supposed to be in a vault. Yeah.
That, like the whether it's subliminal or subconscious or however you want to describe it, it's banks are fearful on if I enable open banking, what happens to my relationship? Am I liable if something happens? Is this going to expand account takeovers? What's happening, all that sort of stuff. And consumers don't like, what does that mean? What does open banking mean? Again, it's like another technology that I don't really see the value in open banking.
Yeah. But I see the scariness of being
Yeah.
insecure potentially, right?
So if you were able to document a day in the life of a new immigrant to this country and what it's like in that first 30 days to try and open a bank account, what's the first thing you do? They typically open a bank account. What's the second thing they do? Sometimes it's the first. Try and get a phone or a telecommunication. Well, you can't get that unless you have a credit card. Well, I can't get a credit card unless I have a bank account. I can't get a bank account because I don't have a credit file in this country.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So you start going on about just the real basics, and you can have someone who is like a business professional from Singapore move to Canada for business, and
It's like they fell from the sky.
Totally, right? Not able to identify that person, validate their income, validate their payroll. They don't have a credit file. So what's the role that open banking can play? To be able to validate they have a banking relationship at some bank in, let's say, Singapore, if that was the example I used earlier. What's the history of that bank? What's their credit rating in that market? Oh, by the way, they just sold their property in that country and they're trying to move a significant amount of money over to this bank. Because that's the challenge. You have now a wire. So I far prefer the reference of connected finance versus open banking. I know it's subtle. Words are really important for me though. So I actually, it changes the framing a little bit.
Well,
Maybe
you're a
it's
product
little less
guy and
scary.
presentation is part of design. I totally get that.
Connected finance, where I can, if I need to validate my income and validate my sources and validate my existing banking relationship and validate my identity, I should be able to do that from other trusted and relied sources to a new relationship that I want to be able to build with. The key there, right, is as the individual who's going to benefit from that in the middle, it should be very transparent for them what information is being asked and for what purpose. That needs to be explicit. And because if you don't know what data is being captured and what they're going to do with that data, are they storing it? Are they storing it somewhere? Are they going to do it for a whole bunch of other things? Are they going to, sell? So it is important. And it's a perfect example of where there needs to be both government and private sector collaboration on building the right standards to provide the right level of privacy and security. And I think the challenge that a lot of people have, whether they be fintechs or open banking companies or people that are trying to open up and leverage open banking capabilities, is the technology is there, but the trust infrastructure around it and the liability risk framework hasn't really been, it's still in its early days. Other countries have built out better frameworks.
Have built frameworks.
Yeah, let's use Australia as an example, right? They're probably 18 months ahead of Canada in that regard. Have a number of Australian banks here in Toronto this week and doing some best practice sharing. And once the government defined what a baseline framework of acceptance on data rights and data usage, MasterCard was actually one of the first companies that were given full accreditation to be able to provide not screen scraping and those type of things, but direct API access and providing the right level of permissions and the right level of transparency for user protection. It went from having 0 banks to all top 20 banks live with direct APIs over a summer.
Yeah.
So standards matter and governance matter and privacy and that. So, and they don't unfortunately move at the same pace as what the technology capabilities are. So it's actually a perfect example where it's in the early stages of a capability that some people see the value in. Other people still don't know how they can use it. But I think when it comes back to what we talked about earlier about relationship, loyalty relationship, enterprise loyalty, I guess, rather than just transactional loyalty. For small businesses, I think it completely modernizes cash flow capabilities, supply chain management.
Yes.
There's a lot of interesting use cases there.
might tie in well to the productivity conversations happening in this country.
Expense
If
management.
goods and services move better, money moves faster. And
Absolutely. Yeah. Virtual cards are not a new thing, but actually get unlocked and unleashed with things like open banking. So I can start building direct relationships with my suppliers. I may be a plumber with 3 vans on the road. And so I'm too small to have a corporate card program.
Yeah.
And so I have these kind of wonky supply chains, and I'm dealing with checks and invoices. And I have 2 people that are sitting there running spreadsheets, managing all these expenses and stuff. How can I have connected finance to those suppliers with virtual cards that are tethered directly to that person? So even if they were hacked, the only place that card can be used is with that merchant. I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but I'm going to start giving you examples where everything gets leveled up.
Honestly, I'm really glad you're selling this to me, because I'm buying it. Because honestly, what we've been, the counter examples are digital finance, but digital only in the way of like digitizing the old process. And it's that connected that really drives a lot of, audience. If you like what we've described, the future laid out here, you're looking for connected finance. Okay. MasterCard just released the Emerging Tech Trends report, which speaks to a bunch of the things. Like I've been cribbing from that in my prep for this. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you'd want to highlight from that report, whether it comes to either the kind of main pillars of how MasterCard is tracking new tech, or, anything else you'd want to say about the company's role in evolving some of these financial services, like from the tech to product? Because you're at a really interesting position where you get to talk about both, right? How one becomes the other.
Yeah. And I know sometimes people get frustrated because they're like, oh, I want it tomorrow, right? Like the early technology, open banking is a great example. There's a lot of people that are very angry in this country who don't have it today.
Yes.
And there's another audience that are like, I don't know what I need it for, right? So there's and that's where it's a very interesting position to be in a company like MasterCard, where you de-risk technology and you shake it down and you stress test it to bring the bar up in terms of the de-risk of that capability, and you lower the bar on being able to gain access to it. And so it's whether it's a small merchant or an individual, they should be able to gain access to that. My mother should be able to figure out how to use biometrics service without having to be a techie.
Yes. The tap.
The tap, exactly. So it's a fun role as a network to be very cognizant of the impact and the value that we drive for someone, but it's about absolutely securing and providing that extra level of trust that this technology can be relied on. The Emerging Tech Report goes into definitely a lot around AI. If we had more time, we can talk about a lot of interesting use cases in travel and health, and a variety of different areas there that we're working on. I would say probably the other wave that you'll start seeing probably more and more at a mainstream level is around quantum computing and the impact that will have on cybersecurity.
Yeah.
When all of our passwords today can be broken within milliseconds.
Yes.
Whether it is about the distribution of deep fakes, the accuracy and quality of deep fakes, quantum computing plays a significant role there. Probably one of the single largest investments MasterCard has been making over the last several years is around quantum computing to be able to bulletproof existing networks, existing transaction management, but create the next wave of opportunities too.
Are you saying that someday soon I could have a quantum MasterCard card?
Maybe.
Okay. That is a great place to end it. Darrell, I really appreciate you talking me through some of this stuff, because it's clear that you put your hands in it, and I appreciate the willingness to be part of that filter between interesting idea to something that becomes a part of every Canadian's day.
Yep.
So thank you so much for this. If there was anyone watching this that wanted to get more into this conversation, some of the tech, where would you be sending them?
Yeah, so MasterCard Canada websites, you've got our signals report there. There's one on future tech trends. There's one on AI specifically. You'll see 2 or 3 more coming out in the next little while. So there's a lot of thought leadership and thought provoking on how do you and it doesn't get into the technology geeky side of it.
Mm.
It's more of the, what does this actually mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And what are some of the questions that you might need to even ask yourself for the viability of your business and the viability of your relationships in your business?
Okay. All right. Well, so check that out, and then maybe we'll have Darrell back to talk about quantum. I'm looking forward to
Sounds
that.
good.
Thank you.
All right. Cheers.